When I was a child, I lived on Rhode Island in a small, predominantly Portuguese neighborhood where most every family knew the members of every other family. I would spend almost every day at my grandmother's house because my father worked 2 jobs and my mother was a nurse, so Grandma did most of the child raising for them. Now, the layout of the house is important here. She had a fairly large house, big front yard, and a long straight driveway running along the right side of the house with a small gate. From the side driveway, there were a few steps into a small, alcove with a door that I would use to get inside. The side door was my grandmother's preferred way that people come in and out of her house, because she was super particular about caring for the garden out front. I used to play with RC cars in the driveway, or just run around and be a little idiot, as children tend to do, and one day a large brown van parked in front of the house while I was outside playing with my RC cars. Grandma was inside in the kitchen, which was situated at the back of the house facing the backyard, so she didn't really know what was happening. I remember a lot of details about this van too. It was huge, it looked like a van you'd see in a 70s movie or something, but the paint was all chipped. It didn't look good at all, it was rusty and beat up. It was filled to the brim with stuff. It had a lot in it too, and I distinctly remember a blonde-haired, pink-faced doll that was so clustered in with other junk that it was pressed right against the glass of the van. There were other plush toys too, but that doll stuck out to me because I had a morbid fear of dolls at the time. My grandmother had porcelain dolls, and my dad had taken to scaring the crap out of me with child's play, so dolls equaled bad at the time. And that probably saved my life, to be honest. There was a man in the front, and I couldn't see his details very well. The car turned off, and he just sat there, staring at me. He motioned for me to come to him, and I approached the van, but as soon as I caught sight of that doll, I just booked it inside, and I left my toys out there and ran into the kitchen screaming and crying. I almost knocked over everything she was cooking, in fact, and I was just completely hysterical. All I can remember screaming is, "A man is out there, a man is out there," over and over again. She picked me up and went outside, and when we were there, the van was gone. There was no evidence of anything. My toys were untouched, and she picked them up for me and just kept me inside all day and said that I wasn't allowed to go outside. I don't think she ever did tell my mum, though, because up until I left home for college, I refused to go outside alone, and my mum always thought that it was weird that I didn't. Now, I'm not the one to really share their paranormal experiences with others super often, but sometimes there's just a point where it becomes too much to not say anything. I'm no stranger to the paranormal, and I'm a believer in it, but these recent experiences make me feel uneasy just thinking of them, let alone experiencing them. I try to stay upbeat and be the funny guy in most circles, but I feel as if this needs to get out there. So, just some quick backstory before I begin. My girlfriend got kicked out of her house and my parents took her in with us. I'm 19 and she's 18. My dad has also been quitting smoking and has more or less replaced it with drinking, causing a lot more fights between my parents than usual. My girlfriend and I both believe the negative energy is probably the main reason that these things have come to our house. So, it started a few weeks ago. My girlfriend and I were just relaxing in our room when suddenly she asks, "Do you feel that?" I, of course, was confused as to what she meant, and she quickly alluded to the entity in the hallway. I know my girlfriend, and she can be spooked easily, but it's never without justification. As soon as she said something, I just got this weird feeling in my lower back, telling me that something was very wrong. I don't know why, but that's just the area that I feel a lot of pressure on whenever there's something around me. She realized that I could feel it too, and she turned to me and said, "It's so dark." She then proceeded to tell me about how when she took a shower earlier that day, the towel was thrown off the bar that she kept it on and into the shower with her. After that, we went out to the kitchen to make some food where the conversation about what happened continued. She told me that she didn't want to sound crazy to me because she was scared of chasing me off with how weird it was, but she claimed that she could feel the presence of different things. She also then proceeded to exclaim that there were 6 different things at our house and all of them were dark. We quickly realized that we were out of pasta and what we were craving that night. So we went to get some at the grocery store, and we both got this really uneasy feeling that something was in our back seat. I could easily brush it off as me or her being paranoid, but we both felt it, and we both felt it follow us into the store as well. And as we were driving home, I looked in the rearview mirror, and I swear to you that something was there. It was a dark shadow, and it kind of just stared at me, I think. I turned around and said, "What's that?" And so did my girlfriend when I said that, and when we looked, there was nothing there. As we were getting close to my house, though, something began to shake the back of my chair. We both immediately jumped out of the car and ran to the front door of the house, and when we got inside, we were both just freaking. We sat up that night talking, and we didn't get much sleep. And to be honest, I really don't know what to do now. I grew up in a small California desert tourist town called Joshua Tree. It was home of the Joshua Tree National Park. Those of us who are older called it the Monument, as it was that before National Parkdom. I was in my early 20s at the time of this, which was approximately 14 years ago, I'd say, and was the only one with a car and a license. Growing up in a small desert town leaves you with limited options for fun, and we would make use of the park often. Occasionally, maybe once a week or so, a group of us would pile into the station wagon with beer, smokes, and a mixtape and drive through the park late at night. It was an empty road, really dark and quiet, other than the loud group of guys in the red Mercury driving fast from one entrance to another. But hours go by each time as we drove the long desolate road and stopped at various rocks we liked to climb. And for the life of me, I still can't understand just how desolate it was, how alone, and there were no other cars, no lights, except the occasional roadwork sign when warranted. And hell is exactly what we thought it was at the time. So this trip started out like pretty much every other, except maybe more of us than usual, I suppose. We were crammed in that car, windows down, as I chain smoked and drove a good 20 miles per hour over the speed limit, gravel splitting up as we had a good time, and shortly into the trip I saw a light, a blue light. It was possibly miles and miles ahead, I'm really not too sure, but I guess that's the thing about the dark, right? Light is free to just kind of shine for miles. I remember saying to my friend something about having to slow down at some point ahead. Must be some road construction left by itself up ahead. I assumed that it had to be a sign. I mean, the light hadn't moved. We continued for a few miles to one of our favorite stops and got out, though. We climbed for a while, maybe 45 minutes or so, drank a little and joked, the norm, and then we piled back in and continued. Now, let me be clear that this light never moved, and we had already been out for an hour in our adventure. And I began to question, too, why the sign would have a blue light of all things. As we approached the light, I started to slow, and slowed more and more as we approached the source. And it wasn't a sign, and it wasn't a car, it wasn't a UFO, because standing on the side of the road, facing towards us, unmoving for over an hour at this point, was a man. A pale white man with a white beard, dirty old miner clothing with an old mining helmet, and even a pickaxe. His light was giving off an unnatural blue light. His face was blank, but he just kind of stared at us, directly at all of us. We sped up at this point as we drove by faster, his head turning to keep pace with us as we left. His light visible, unmoving once again, and facing us the entire trip out. I remember looking at the car clock shortly after passing him. It was damn near exactly 1 a.m. when we passed him, and we never saw a car or, hell, even a horse, either way as well, for this old sickly pale miner to get into the park, nor any reason for him to even be there. Worst of all, though, we estimated that this miner had to have been standing there, facing us, for at least an hour and a half, never moving. I mean, not once did that light flicker as if he looked down for a moment or anything. He didn't even turn his head. He just stood there staring down at a road at a car full of dumbasses. We never did see him again, nor did we ever get an explanation as to why he was there or who he was. However, a couple of years ago I decided to check to see if anyone else experienced the same thing. And I found one other story of a couple that saw him near where we did. Standing there, just staring late at night. I must admit that as a man now, I wish I would have stopped. Even if we would have experienced the most horrifying thing ever, I do wish we would have stopped because I honestly believe that there was a ghost of an old dead miner out in that park, and I would know for sure today. The year is 2016, and it's the last day of school. After school, which ended at around 12 a.m, my mother, brother, stepdad and I left for the south of France. My stepdad had a vacation home there, so we left around 2 p.m. and braced ourselves for a really long drive. I was cheery though, and so was everyone in the car. We listened to music and played some road trip games, kind of like those ones where you need to come up with the name of an animal, which should start with the last letter of an animal used by the previous person. You get what I mean, just stupid little games. Either way though, we're 5 hours into the drive, about halfway in I'd say, and we're having dinner in a busy parking lot when suddenly my mother receives a phone call. But my mother asks who's on the phone, since the number calling her was one she didn't recognize, and a French-speaking woman on the other side of the phone told my mother that she had a present for her and that she wanted to know our own current address. The woman claimed to have tried to drop it off at our old address since she thought that my mother still lived there, but the new owners told her that my mother had actually moved and that they couldn't help the woman. It wasn't even our former address too, but our former one since we moved 2 times on a short span of time. My mother, who wasn't very attentive because she was so relaxed and enjoying the trip, unknowingly gave away our then current address. After ending the call though, she explained to my stepdad, my brother and I what the call was about, and we instantly started asking questions. I mean, why would a person have a present for her? How did she get my mother's number? And why would she ask about our address? And why did the woman speak French even though they don't speak French where we live? And it was at this point that my mother's face turned pale, and so did mine. We were all really creeped out and obviously nervous. My mother had given this woman our address. We were hundreds of kilometers away from our house, and we just couldn't do anything. After dinner, my mother went to recharge her phone inside the building that stood next to the parking lot. And it wasn't even a parking lot, more like a stop for tourists, but the building had shops and restaurants in it. And it was there that my mother reached out to the people who bought our former house. But they confirmed too that a few hours before my mother called them, a woman did indeed come by and ask them about my mother. And they also said that this wasn't someone that worked for a delivery service or anything. According to the people that my mother had called, the woman didn't have a specialized vehicle with a logo on it, nor did she wear any kind of uniform. The woman was also older, but not that old, but they estimated her to be in her late 40s. My mother also asked them if they had given this woman a phone number, which they didn't. My mother ended the call, and we had even more questions now. At this point, all of us were severely creeped out though. We got back into the car and continued our drive, and this part, however, wasn't as cheerful and carefree as the first one. All 4 of us had a discussion on what we should do next, and even why my mother went as far as actually giving our address to this person. My stepdad called our neighbor and asked him to keep an eye on our property, but our house was on the top of a hill and it was rather isolated. Our neighbor had to go over to our house and circle around the property a couple of times, and at this point, it was also getting pretty dark, so it was hard to see. My mother called one of our close friends to go and take a look at our home, and I could hear the stress in her voice as she called him. That friend did go over after he received the call, and he drove to our home. He said that when he arrived, the porch looked normal and that all the lights in our house appeared to be out. My mother's friend and our neighbor actually ran into one another and both scared the crap out of each other, but once they both came to the conclusion that it was safe, they both just went back home. After a while, though, our neighbor texted my stepdad that he mentioned what happened to his son, who happened to be a policeman. He informed his colleagues, who were doing a nighttime patrol in our neighborhood anyway, and they said they'd check every few hours just to see what was going on. The police never saw anyone break in that night, but they did say that around 11:30 at night, they saw a car drive onto the road that led to our house. Now, no one would ever drive down this driveway, unless they were visiting, and besides the handful amount of the people who live there. And according to the people who patrolled around our neighborhood that night, though the car didn't stay long and they never saw anyone get out of it, the car did actually show up. I'm really glad we didn't think about what happened all vacation long, because that would have been a total downer, but still, the whole situation was just really weird and kind of sketchy. We never did hear anything from this woman again, and we didn't receive any presents. I'm also very glad that we moved out later that year, because who knows who that person was and what they wanted. I work in a care home, a very, very posh one in fact. It costs about £1,200 per week to live here, so, as you can imagine, very posh. It has 2 floors and 4 suites, 2 on each floor and either side of the building, and it's very large. Tonight I've been working downstairs, and I am not a fan of downstairs. I was in the kitchenette on one of the suites. One of our jobs is to clean the kitchens, as during the day the cleaners can't do it because of safety risks and whatnot. I had my back to the door, and I had this weird feeling that someone was in the doorway or was walking to and from one end of the wall or whatever. I don't know how to describe it, but it was a weird feeling. I was putting cutlery away, and I felt as if someone had just very, very gently pushed up against my back, and I could feel my uniform move. I turn around and expect to see my coworker, but nothing. It's just me alone in a big dining room or kitchenette, and the lights in the hallway were off. And then the rest of the time that I was in there, it felt like someone was literally stood right behind me watching me work, and I did not like that at all. I also had an odd experience down at the other end of the building in the other suite too. I was in the kitchenette dining room, and I'd been cleaning. I had my back to the door, which was on the very end of the dining room, and very, very loudly, someone began to whistle a nursery rhyme in the corridor. Everyone was asleep though. No alarms had gone off to say someone had gotten out of bed as well. The other member of the staff was having a cigarette outside, so it was just me downstairs. I asked another colleague, and she said that she's heard the whistling down there before, but everyone's asleep at midnight, and no one down there can actually whistle anyway. I do get an odd feeling here on the ground floor, but it's always around midnight to 3 a.m. It constantly feels like just somebody else is running up and down the corridors or rushing around you. It makes you feel kind of dizzy and sick sometimes too. Sorry about my rambling, but this helps me keep awake on these shifts, and I just thought it would be something good to share and to get ideas. Especially because some of the day staff even say that this place creeps them out too, and that is during the day. G'day mates, it's Busta here. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you would like to help me out, then please go ahead and watch another video by clicking on a card on the screen. As always guys, thanks for all the love and support, and I'll see you mates in the next one.